My name is Craig Hankenson. I am president of a company called Producers Incorporated. We are an entertainment agency. I began as a performer. I graduated from Eastman School of Music as a voice major and got my degrees in music and music history. Then for a while had an opera career, sang trying to make a living in opera, while I was chairman of the voice department at Auburn University. I went from there to San Francisco Opera for a few years, received a Ford Foundation grant in management, and that sort of turned my career around. I then went to Brevard, North Carolina, was associate director of Brevard Music Center, involved in opera. And then I was hired by the Saratoga Performing Arts Center in upstate New York, which had gone through 2 seasons. We were the summer home with the Philadelphia Orchestra, while Eugene Ormandy was the conductor, and the New York City Ballet with George Balanchine and Lincoln Kirstein. Those were glorious years for me as a presenter. I stayed there for 12 years, then went to Wolf Trap and was director of Wolf Trap for 3 seasons, and there I decided to start Producers Incorporated, basically as a program advisor for summer festivals. And the artists that we represented said, "Why are we doing this just in the summertime? Let's get some jobs with the performing arts centers." And so we evolved into a booking agency. And of course, part of that was attending conferences. And we have been members of, APAP since it just started, and it was basically then an organization of presenters who presented a series of attractions. So, and then all of the regional organizations began forming and having regional conferences, and we attend all of them. So we get to see the variety of differences between the different regional conferences. It begins with the Conference of the Western Arts and the regionals generally end with the Pennsylvania presenters who have their conference. We have so far had the Western Arts, Arts Midwest, now the Performing Arts Exchange, which is the South and the Atlantic seaboard. And we go from here to Arts Northwest, which is on the other side of the country, and then Pennsylvania presenters, and finally our APAP in New York City in January. And there has been a great evolvement of these conferences over the years. The focus changes every decade, I would say. When we first started working with the conferences, there were numerous organizations across the United States that had series of concerts where they would market anywhere from 4 to a dozen concerts, and they'd go out and hire a couple, maybe 1 or more major attractions to sell the tickets, but their subscription series depended on them, and they trusted them from the experience they've had through the years. It was sort of like a community concert the situation that developed into a more professional operation of series. But then they would fill in their season with lesser known attractions, high quality, that their audiences would trust and knew if they bought the season ticket, well, we may not know this name, but we'll enjoy it. That has changed radically. Now, most presenters really want to look at attractions that will be known by their audiences that will sell tickets, because they're much more dependent upon the ticket sales now. Contributions are not as major a part of their income as used to be, and of course government support has in some states just disappeared. So the presenters themselves have had to become more innovative. And of course, myself, I'm 81, going on 82 years old. I've been in the business a long time. As I said, I started as an opera singer, and so I've been on both sides. I've been a performer, I've been a presenter, and an agent out there marketing. And every phase of the business has changed radically. There were times when you were a vital customer of the local printer with the printing press or wherever you got your printing done, but everything was done in these fancy, slick brochures, and it involved a huge mailing each year, getting the mailers out, and then, of course, phone calls to follow through. But over a period of time, the mailers would get attention when they arrived, perhaps, and then would fade. But something came along called the computers, which set things on a different scale, and I actually was very involved in that. When I was with San Francisco Opera, I worked in our ticket office, and the ticket office was a huge area, a storage area for hard tickets. You had to have a ticket for every seat in the house, and every performance had to have a rack, and people were accustomed to coming up and thumbing through what tickets were available to get the best seat available in their price range. Or if they weren't at the box office, they would go to an area, sometimes department stores or even grocery stores, that would sell a voucher to you for a ticket. You'd then take the voucher to the box office. Well, while I was there in San Francisco, they created Bay Area Rapid Transit, which was a subway system, and they announced that IBM would be selling tickets at every entrance to the subway. And I thought, wow, boy, that would really work in the performing arts if people could actually get the ticket where they bought it, didn't have to bring a voucher to the box office, and all the area that's taken up in it. I mean, the accounting would be so much easier. So I went to IBM and said, hey, what about computerizing ticket? And IBM studied it for like 6 weeks, and then they came back and said, it's not a big enough industry. It can't support the investment. A few years later, I found myself at Saratoga Performing Arts Center, where we had 5,100 seats under cover and limitless seats out on the lawn. We were in a relatively rural area that came alive the month of August during racing season. And we depended totally on all of these markets, the stores that sold our tickets and brought in. So I thought again about computerization of tickets. And fortunately, one of our board members was Edgar Bronfman from the Seagram's company. He loved the idea. He was also involved with a computer company in Minneapolis. And so he started a company we call Ticket Reservation Systems, which was TRS. And at the same time, I was working with Tandy Radio Shack, because Tandy came out with these little computers that would fit on your desk, had huge memory, like 32K memory. And we were computerizing our fundraising office with them. Well, TRS, Ticket Reservation System, Tandy didn't like the, and so we changed the name to Ticketron. So Ticketron was the first company in Saratoga. Performing Arts Center became the first theater in the world that went out on the limb to computerize all of its tickets. And it was a nightmare for several years. We had Van Cliburn performance with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and there was a section of our theater of like 100 seats in a square that were totally empty in a sold-out performance, which didn't make sense. Until Elton John came along, and those same tickets, there were 2 tickets for every seat there. So things like that happened at the very beginning. And dressing the house was really a challenge on how you would, and people had been accustomed to coming to the office and thumbing through their tickets for the best. They had to trust a computer that wasn't always reliable on the best seats that they wanted. So we went, in fact, I was on stage with Eugene Ormandy once. We were presenting in an award ceremony, and I was facing Ormandy, and suddenly I saw his face look like this, and I turned around. There was a little old lady with an umbrella coming out. You ruined my season tickets with this damn computer thing. So it was a great experience, but and of course I was not invested in it. Edgar Bronfman was, who lost millions of dollars in the very beginning. It was not profitable until the ball teams, the baseball teams, jumped on board and started computerizing their tickets. So the computer then developed, and we came into a situation with the World Wide Web, where we had a network, and email developed, and email has developed into primary marketing system. But there too, it's like learning your talent as a performer. There, we discovered there's definitely a talent in composing emails and getting attention from emails, because when everybody found out about emails, it was free, would go out the presenters became deluged then with their inbox and their emails. So we had to learn how to market on email in order to get the attention. And these conferences, places like PAE, have become ideal in that situation as sources of learning on how to share your ideas on what's successful for you in the marketing, as far as even email, or in the creating the type of performances that are going to be unique and are going to develop an audience, because it's a challenge. There are thousands of very talented attractions out there, and I say that success in the performing arts really is like a 3-legged milking stool to stand. First of all, you have to have the talent, but then second, you need connections, contacts. And the third is basically luck, being in the right place at the right time. The contact can help put you there, but there are so many wonderful attractions out there that haven't ever been fortunate enough to run into that third leg, being in the right place at the right time when the opportunity comes up. So it's very difficult for presenters to be very attracted to a wonderful attraction, but then to get the word out to their ticket-buying public about how wonderful this act is. If the act doesn't have exposure on television or film or recordings. And the recording industry is another area that has changed radically. There was a time when I was at Saratoga, record companies sort of ruled the popularity of an attraction. And not only in selling the records and getting the exposure out there from basically radio playtime, but also there was the responsibility of getting the artists that they signed who were not yet popular, who didn't have the exposure. And Saratoga Performing Arts Center was a great opportunity because in those days the major artists didn't come with opening attractions. They had to approve the attraction. So Columbia Records, for instance, came to us at Saratoga and said, if you will use our opening attraction, we'll pay the fee for it. So it was sort of a payola situation, but I mean, I had people like John Denver as an opening attraction for Peter, Paul, and Mary. Numerous opening attractions that then became. In fact, John Denver, when he was opening, his recording of the Country Roads, I think it was first, he suddenly became big, and there was a situation where his agent came and said, John is not going to want to perform for $2,500. And so we arranged, but then John came back and said, no, absolutely, no, I agreed to do that, I will do it. And I said, look, I have an open date at the end of the season, let's do it. So he came back and sold out, just John Denver. And we became very good friends until his tragic ending. But the record companies were very involved in the success of performers in those days. But as the internet came along and social networks, etc., the record companies then and record sales no longer became as necessary. So now presenters and agents have even a greater challenge in getting the word out and selling the attractions. And again, that's where conferences like PAE come into play.
You said there was this three-legged stool. My question was going to be, so talent, luck, connections. What about money?
Money?
Money. Because if they don't have an agent, they're going to have marketing materials. They may need to pay for a website. They may need to pay for a showcase. So,
sure.
Does an artist need to think of their career as
they do, and
an investment in themselves?
And again, the computer has sort of become a tool in that, because now there are these things, GoFundMe, for instance, and artists can go on online and present themselves online, and a state I need funding. And we've had several artists do that. And each time, I can think of 3 who've done that, and they set a goal, a dollar goal. One of them went 3 times over that goal. So it's been a very, but again, it's an example of how marketing has totally changed. And the attractions have more of a responsibility now in marketing. Our agency, Producers Incorporated, does a lot of preparing materials, paying for materials, of course, going to all the conferences, etc. We don't charge our artists for being on our roster. We take a commission from their fee, and anywhere from 10 to 15% of what they generate. But again, that becomes a challenge, because you find, wow, we're spending a lot of money on the marketing, and some of this should be profit for the agency. So
not only that, but your agencies range in staffing sizes.
Right.
So in your case, for people to have a better understanding, you go to one conference. How many staff people do you staff your booth with at some of these events? Just one?
No, we always have more than one. We spend over $40,000 a year on conferences. So it's expensive. And the artists don't always appreciate this. For some reason, it's always the agency is the one who they look to if the ends don't meet. If they go to a performance and they took it at a lower fee and they don't generate the added bonuses that they expected, then they say, we can't pay you a commission, sometime. And, that it seems like it's always the agency is the last one. They don't realize an agency, when an agency produces a date, they've already done everything. Their staff, everything that's gone into it, the marketing, the phone calls, the mails, etc. We've spent everything necessary to get that date for them. But we don't get paid until the performance takes place. And if the performance doesn't take place, then there is a toss-up. And sometimes presenters don't appreciate an agency's position, that they have done everything in this, and that sometimes the presenter will say, well, we'll pay, we can't do this performance, we have to cancel. We'll send money to the artist, we'll take care of the artist. Well, what about the agency? So there are a lot of little turns along the way in being an artist representative. And it's very important to work closely with the artists themselves. But it's also important to work with the presenters. So you find yourself as a facilitator. There was a time, in the time of Saul Hurok and those, the big, when Columbia Artists was very big, where it was all all set in stone. Everything was set in stone, and the agency and that was, it was totally between the agency and the presenter and the negotiating. But now I think probably most agencies find themselves in the roles of facilitators. They are as much representing the presenter as the artist on their roster, because none of us are in there just for the short term. We hope, I mean, our company has been in existence since 1980, and there are those that have been in business much longer than we have. But you have to have a reputation and a good record for doing business with presenters. You can no longer have those deals that you hear about that took place at some time where, for instance, at one time in the business, the major agencies would say, oh, yes, we'll give you this major artist here, but you'll have to buy two more artists from us. It's a package deal, 3. Well, you can no longer do that. At least I don't think you can. It's very, very different now than it was, especially 50 years ago, when I first was involved in the business. The negotiations are different. You try and help, if you can, you work with the artist and for the presenter to say, we're confident you can sell tickets. We'll help you with the marketing. We'll come in and perform for you for our expenses. And sometimes it's even less than, we will share the risk with you. And then we'll divide the proceeds. And that too has evolved over the years, because presenters, and I was one of those presenters who tried to put all the expenses I could up front to prorate the costs of our operation. So you reached a point on these percentage deals where you would go in and agree if there were a certain number of tickets sold, you'd get a percentage of that. But it became more and more difficult to settle on that. Computers also helped that a lot, because they would print out exactly what came in ticket sales. But then presenters began to find ways to manipulate that. And so now a lot of the sharing deal is based on the number of tickets sold. If you sell a certain number of tickets, you will get, let's say, if you sell 500 tickets, and you get a bonus of $1,000. And for every incremental above that, you get a certain number more. Well, invariably, sometimes if it's based on 500 tickets, they've sold 499 tickets, they say. And now some presenters are very generous, and they say, oh, yeah, we'll go ahead, we'll pay you the bonus. But others will say, no, only 499 were sold, so there's no bonus.
Then what do? Do you have to keep them honest, or?
It's difficult. Now, we're not very, you're seldom successful in doing that. First of all, unless it is a major touring company that has a tour manager that is dedicated to just that, it's impossible to do it.
Let me ask you, where you're talking about 500 tickets and a bonus, things of this nature, is there not some kind of basic guarantee of a minimum?
Yes, there almost always there is a guarantee. Very rarely do you have what is called a four-wall situation, where you go in and participate from the first dollar with no. Now, when you have a touring company, a large touring company that's out on the road for 3 months, you have holes in the tour. There are dates that are really difficult to fill. And in some cases where you have already recouped the tour's expenses and bookings, you will go in, rather than have them sit for 3 or 4 nights in a hotel somewhere, you will go in on a straight four-wall deal and say, we'll split the first dollar. But then, too, you have some people, after they agree to that, will say, well, no, the facility has upfront expenses. Can't we take some expenses out first? But then you say, well, hey, we have expenses too. The airfares, the buses, the payroll, etc. So, there's a lot of negotiating that goes on for when you have a touring attraction, as opposed to booking one night, isolated one night events. And tours are a challenge to book. Ask any of the Broadway touring companies, how difficult it is to fill in the checkerboard of getting from one place to another with time to load in and set up, and at the same time without having too much time in between, so that you have dark nights that you're still having a payroll and hotels to pay for. So it's definitely an art to putting a tour together.
How far out in advance?
Well, it's generally pretty far in advance for tours, at least a year in advance. It's very difficult to put a tour together after a venue has begun putting their season together, because a tour, of course, financially needs to progress so that it's not much more than 200 miles between if it's one night events. They need the travel time to go from one place to another. And if you're too late, if you're later on in the season, your presenters have already booked events, and they already have a checkerboard of events, and it doesn't always fit the very time, for instance, that you're going through Oklahoma and need dates and venues in Oklahoma. The venues in Oklahoma may have booked a lot of events during the time that you're traveling through there. So it's better to begin at least a year in advance. And I think most presenters book their tours first, because they are experienced in running into this problem. So the agencies that have the one-night events generally find that the booking of their events is delayed. The decisions and committing to dates are delayed until the venues that do program the touring things have their tours basically in place. So I think that the touring agencies generally are the first ones out in the in the booking process. By the time you get to January with APAP, it's pretty, for that year's tours, it's a major challenge to fill dates in a tour that late in the season if you're booking for that coming fall, winter. So at APAP, that's generally when they start planning the tours for 18 months out. And all the presenters are walking around with their calendars, and when the people that are sitting in booths talking, they're generally going through all the open spaces and see how we can match our performers with the open dates that you have. And you know, there are certain laws that come into play. For instance, if you have an attraction that's based on the West Coast and you have an East Coast presenter, you have the added expense to consider of getting that performer to the East Coast to that presenter. Another thing that has changed a lot are major groups, touring groups, big bands, for instance. That used to be a major attraction. They were part of everyone's season. But moving a big band around the country, there's really only one now, the Glenn Miller Orchestra, that has its bus, and they travel for like 40 weeks out of the year just touring. But again, the personnel in that band, most of the guys are single or divorced, or they're young students just out of school who can be out on the road for 40 weeks out of the year traveling. But then when you're booking them as an agency, booking them, for instance, if you're in Florida and you want the Glenn Miller Orchestra, the only time you can look at is generally sometime in January or early February. That's when their bus is in that area. And the other big bands, like Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra, for instance, have contractors all around the country who have musicians available, and they will accept dates in different parts of the country, and then the contractor will put together the band for them. But then in some of the smaller cities, the presenters will say, well, are these pickup musicians? I mean, we don't want our audience to come in and see their friends up in the orchestra, in the Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra. So there's some finesse in putting these things together.
If you were a young person,
what do you mean, if? I'm making 20-year plans.
If you were
yes.
a much
I'm sorry.
younger person,
I couldn't resist that.
And if you were thinking of considering entering the profession, what should you think of preparing? How might you best prepare to have any career in, I would say, not just as an agent, but maybe an agent or an arts administrator? What advice, what do you think they should be doing?
Well, from having been in all of an administrator, a performer, etc., based on my experience, I would say don't overvalue in the beginning what your requirements are. Be willing to work in one of the lower echelons and volunteer, get as involved in the organization, in the support of an organization as possible. The people during my years as an administrator, the most successful ones were the ones who really were committed to getting the job done. It was not a 9-to-5 job for them. They were interested in getting in there and pitching in and doing whatever needed to be done at the moment. Because the performing arts is, I mean, we don't deal, we deal both in products, tangible products, but a great deal of what we produce are not tangible. They are almost spiritual in nature, because we give people experiences, and our goal is to give people experiences outside and beyond their day-to-day experiences. The ideal is when a person goes into a performance, they come out on cloud nine. And so there's nothing always tangible about the results in a performance. And the performances, vary depending on the company, the attraction, and what they're doing, whether it's a mind reader or a modern dance company, or like some speed painters who are painting these portraits to music. And so the experience varies between being a really moving message and being a circus. So there's nothing. Our products vary probably more than in any other industry. And if you're going into the industry, you want to look at what area you want to focus on. If you want to be a performer, certainly if that's it, your preparation has been in one area of performance. But if it's administration, you need to vary your experience as much as possible, because you're going to be, unless you're working specifically with a dance company or an opera company, but if you're working with a performing arts center, it presents a variety of programs, you need to really become a jack of all trades.